Hello, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of Pastatime with the Scariest Podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace, this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And we're here with a few stories, some creepy pasta, if you will. Adam, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone what those are?
So, creepypastas are fictional, short-ish horror stories that can be found on the internet at places like creepypasta.com, sometimes the No Sleep subreddit, sometimes the SCP Foundation, and other various communities that share fictional stories like that. Sometimes they're even written to us by our very own spooky friends who have just, the urge to put something down on paper. It's fictional and they know it and they decide they're going to share it with us to read. Robin, for someone out there who has a suggestion for a creepypasta or has their own they would like us to read on the show, where can they send it?
You can send it to our email, pastatime@scariest.com. You can also go to our website, scariest.com, fill out the contact us page, and it emails it to us that way. We also have different social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that fun stuff. We started a Snapchat, never used it. We have all these things we've started and never used. But yeah, feel free to contact us at the aforementioned things.
Indeed. So we're going to be reading 4 different creepypastas for you guys this particular show. Robin, would you like to start us out, or do you want/need me to?
No, yeah. Let me start.
Okay, cool. Go ahead and take it away.
Is that a song?
I mean, it's a...
is that from Hamilton?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this first one is titled "The Cat Scratching at My Door," and it's written by Weatherford and Sky, which is a pretty cool name. It begins. I never thought a childish prank would save me and my brother's life. It began in late September. My family cat had passed from old age a few weeks prior. I missed her terribly and assumed the strange things that began to happen were just echoes of my grief. When she was still alive, she used to scratch at my door until I let her into my room, and she used to use the crawl space as her own little home, sometimes hiding away for most of the day until pushing the door open in the middle of the night. I'd gotten so used to it that I was no longer startled by the tapping of little paws upstairs and the sound of little doors creeping open. So used to it, in fact, that when those same things happened after her death, it took me a while to notice. When I finally did notice, the sounds gave me a strange feel of unease, but familiarity. I told myself that it was just the creaking of an old house, but part of me wanted to believe she was still here in some capacity. One night in October, I was awoken by scratching at my door and a faint meow. It lasted only a few seconds, but I heard it clearly. I thought it was a dream. It had to have been. After all, she was gone. But then, it kept happening every night at 1:46 a.m. I would hear scratching at my door and the cries of a cat who was long dead. I told no one of it because even though it frightened me, I didn't want to lose what I had left of my dear cat. The scratching stayed the same until the night of October 21st, when it became harder to ignore. Everything was normal that night. My parents had gone out for the night, and my brother was sleeping downstairs. I watched YouTube until I fell asleep with the glow of my laptop still on my face. When I heard the scratching, I wasn't even scared. It felt like any other night, until it didn't stop. The scratching only got more frantic, and the crying grew in volume with each swipe of a claw. I'd never heard my cat act like this, even when she was alive. I quickly sat up in my bed and checked the time.
I don't think that's her cat. I mean, aside from the fact that it's dead, it sounds like it's some sort of demon.
1:46 a.m. Like always, the scratching got even worse. It sounded like she could tear through the door at any moment. I got up from my bed and slowly cracked open the door. My heart was racing. I had no idea what I would see behind that door, but I had to open it. I opened the door only a crack, and suddenly it pushes open. However, there was nothing behind the door. I felt a strange presence, like something came into the room. I didn't know what else to do but to go back to bed and try to fall asleep. The next few nights were just the same. The scratching was almost deafening until I opened my door to let no one inside. It was creepy, but comforting. Every time I opened the door, it was like my cat came to visit me from beyond the grave. That's just a bad sentence. I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, anything that you have to say like came to visit from beyond the grave is like bad idea.
I mean, you know my biggest pet peeve when it comes to movies. It's a phrase that is spoken in so many bad movies, and I've only ever heard it maybe once or twice where it's spoken, and it wasn't
once
awful.
And for all.
Once and for all. We have to take care of this once and for all. If you hear that in a movie, you're in for a shit show. Every now and then there's an exception. I've seen it once, like I said, maybe twice, but like Final Destination 2, Allie Larder, they're in the car figuring out how to defeat death, and her reading of that, like, once and for all, it makes me want to throw my television through a fucking wall. So, anyways.
Tell me how you really feel.
Just saying.
All right. The last night I felt her presence was a night I will never forget. To this day, it was the most horrifying night of my life. It was Halloween night. I had just come home early from a party so I could stay with my brother for the night as my parents were out of town. We watched and made fun of Halloween movies from our childhood until midnight. BT Dubs, one of my favorite Halloween movies of all time, is Under Wraps. It's called Under Wraps. It's a Disney movie. It's so cute. It's about a mummy that comes back to life.
The title makes more sense now.
Yeah. Under Wraps. Yeah. But I freaking love that movie. Of course, there's always Hocus Pocus and stuff like that, but Under Wraps, mwah.
Chef's kiss.
All right. Sorry, I'm distracted. I want to watch that movie after this now. I thought it would be funny to scare him with the scratching and meowing, so I told him to sleep in my room that night. I never thought a childish prank would save me and my brother's life. I got in bed and he got in the sleeping bag beside me. He fell asleep almost immediately while I could barely keep still from the anticipation. Suddenly, my window flooded with light. I assumed it was my parents coming back early from their trip, but something felt off. The clock struck 1:46 a.m. Instead of scratching or meowing, the little door to the crawl space just flung open. A dark figure rushed out and jumped right at me. I let out a scream, waking my brother beside me. The dark figure went through my chest and disappeared behind me. I was left hyperventilating and holding my hand to my chest. This wasn't a visit. It was a warning. I heard what sounded like someone trying to get inside the house, and without hesitation, I grabbed my brother and told him to go into the crawl space. He was groggy and disoriented, but did what I said. I followed behind him and moved a chair in front of the little door before closing it. I told him to be completely silent. We heard a big crash and then footsteps downstairs. Someone had broken through the window. I heard the stranger open all the doors and push things over. I felt my face go white as I heard the stranger start to come up the stairs.
How do you feel your face go white? I know what it means to feel your face go hot or your blood run cold. How do you feel a color?
It's like, I assume, it's like you feel all of the blood rush out of your face, you know?
Okay.
Like, it's
I
just
guess,
chilled.
yeah, I could see that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Continue. I'm sorry.
I held my hand over my brother's mouth and began to pray in my head. The stranger was at the door. My heart was pounding. He flung the door open and entered the room. I could hear him flip my bed over and knock over my nightstand. I thought we were going to die. My brother was silently texting the police. You can text the police?
Apparently. Hey, you up?
While all I could do was stare at the door, knowing it would open at any second. The stranger pushed over the chair in front of the crawl space. The only thing left between me and the intruder was a little door. My brother and I grabbed the handle and held it shut. I then heard the hiss and growl of a cat. It felt like it was right behind us. Finally, the intruder tried to open the door. We held it shut for as long as we could until the stranger flung it open with one great pull. Before I could even get a good look at him, the dark figure leapt out from behind us and pounced on his face. It all happened so quickly, you could only see the flicks of blood flying around. He fell to the ground, crying out and holding his now mangled face. The dark figure ran into the shadows, and my brother and I ran out the door and down the stairs. We screamed for help out in the cold until the neighbors came outside to see what was wrong. The police arrived a short time after. It turns out the stranger was a drug-addicted ex-convict who was breaking into people's homes around the area looking for cash. They found him screaming in pain, covering his hollowed-out eyes.
Oh my God.
The police also found a knife beside him that he had taken from our kitchen. My brother and I were standing out in the cold when I saw the faint green glow of my cat's eyes in my bedroom window. That was the last time I ever saw my family cat.
Wow. That was pretty
not
good.
bad.
Yeah, I kind of liked it, actually.
I think it's more of like a feel-good story.
Cat came back from the grave
to save
the person's life.
Yeah, I think it's cute. I like it.
Honestly, I think it's pretty good. Like I mentioned, I think it has that, like, anyone who's lost a pet knows the pain of losing a pet, and it sucks. And the idea that they're still watching over you, like, this is a very, like, exaggerated version of your pets there watching over you. And of course, like, having this person have their eyeballs scooped out is pretty fucking brutal. But,
if I were a cat trying to save my owners, I too would scratch the eyeballs out of someone.
Yeah, honestly, when you were reading it, when you got to the end, for me, I thought it was going to be like the shadow was behind them and then it attacked them. Because if I'm thinking like it's a cat, and it was a real cat, the cat would be like, "Why the fuck are you in my crawl space?" And then just like claw you while you were about to get murdered by this person. But nah, the story had a good ending. I liked it. It was good.
Yeah, it was a good, solid story.
I liked it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move into my first story of the show. And this one is called The Statue. And it goes like this.
The Statue.
A few years ago, a mother and father decided they needed a break. So they wanted to head out for a night on the town.
Who doesn't want to go out on a night on the town?
They called their most trusted babysitter. When the babysitter arrived, the two children were already fast asleep in bed. So the babysitter just got to sit around and make sure everything was okay with the children. Later that night, the babysitter got bored and went to watch TV, but she couldn't watch it downstairs because they did not have cable downstairs. The parents didn't want children watching too much garbage. So, she called them and asked them if she could watch cable in their room. Of course, the parents said it was okay, but the babysitter had one final request. She asked if she could cover up the angel statue outside the bedroom window with a blanket or a cloth because it made her nervous. The phone line was silent for a moment, and the father, who was talking to the babysitter at the time, said, "Take the children and get out of the house, and we'll call the police. We don't own an angel statue." Not sure if an angel statue suddenly appearing warrants running out of the house, unless you know something about this angel statue, like it's, a weeping angel.
It's Doctor Who.
Anyways, back to the story. The police found both of the children and the babysitter slumped in pools of their own blood within 3 minutes of the call. No statue was found.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
That's the end.
What?
That's the end of the statue.
That's the end.
Yeah. Children and babysitter murdered. Angel statue vanished. This was written by Anonymous. Shout out to Anonymous for writing that.
I am disappointed. I am disappointed that there's not more, Like, I want more.
I read it and I was just like, this one is so short and it's so incomplete that I have to share it with other people, Like, you could build this one up really well, and if you really want to make the angel statue your bad guy, go for it. If you want it to be mysterious, that works too. This seems like a rough first draft of a story, but it also, as I read it, made me want to rewrite it, because I feel like I could rewrite it and, like, really flesh it out. So.
You probably could. I have a few Doctor Who books that involve, the Weeping Angels, and those are more riveting than this story.
I think when you have the dad say, like, immediately get out of the house, it's like, but it's just a statue. Like, why would I leave the house?
You gotta build up. You gotta build up why.
Yeah. So before we move into our next story, we are going to take a really quick commercial break. And we're back.
All right. So this next story is titled The White Face in the Window, and it is written by Nick Ledesma. So we'll see how this one goes.
I thought for a second that was a fake name, like Lick D's Nuts, but I couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be. So if someone else figures out what Nick Ledesma is, it might actually just be a name.
It might just actually be a name. And then he's like, fuck you. Lick these nuts. All right. But yeah, so the picture for this story is very terrifying. It's like shitty looking blinds on a window, and there's like a creepy white face in the background. It's terrifying. Okay. So the story begins. Last winter, I gave you my heart.
The very next
day.
day.
Next day, you gave it away. Okay, no. Last winter, I was walking through a park, which sounds really similar, near my apartment when I came across 5 young boys attempting to smash an object with a hammer. Granted, Chicago children are probably more violent than most.
Well, that's fucked up
but
and judgmental.
I'm not used to seeing such things in my particular neighborhood. Are you like, fuck you?
I never smashed shit with a hammer, but if I ever fucking see... No, I'm kidding.
You have stolen stuff off people's yards. I think that's...
Non-violent crime.
Yeah. I jogged over to them mostly out of curiosity, but also to make sure they weren't torturing some poor squirrel or a pigeon or something. If I'd known the sort of thing I was about to come in contact with, I would have probably went home and bolted the door. One of the boys was clutching some sort of dark wooden board covered with black paint and holding it at arm's length with his face turned away and his eyes closed. A second boy, I remember one of his friends calling him either Peter or Paul, was aggressively prying the hammer out of the hands of the boy who had been swinging at the wooden board moments earlier, while the other 2 kids watched without saying a word. In spite of all the hammering and arguing, the surface of the board looked perfectly smooth and intact from the angle I was approaching. I put on my toughest adult voice and got the kids to quit yelling and fighting over the hammer just long enough to ask them what in the hell they were trying to do. The boy holding the hammer, Peter or Paul, looked me straight in the face and said, "We're gonna break the devil into 6 pieces and bury him in the woods." I was stunned, but also amused. I figured he had seen something like this on television and sort of laughed it off as I asked, "So you kids think this plank is the devil?" Peter or Paul was clearly not pleased by this question and said something along the lines of, "Are you stupid or what? That thing ain't no plank." Ain't a plank. I just added the shitty grammar, apparently.
I liked it better your way.
Thank you. I took creative liberties. Okay. As I took my first look at the wooden board up close, I was surprised to see that the entire surface had not been painted with black paint as I had first thought. It was actually hand-painted to the point that it was nearly covered with a language I wasn't familiar with. It looked vaguely Asian or Middle Eastern. It was entirely alien to me aside from the upper left and right corners, which displayed very detailed paintings of the sun and moon. In the center of both the sun and moon were unnerving faces with blank expressions. As I thought about this last detail, it became clear to me that this board was some sort of antique, handmade Ouija. Peter or Paul explained to me that his grandfather owned an antique store and was on his deathbed. He had requested that the boy's mother take this board from his store safe and break it into 6 pieces and dispose of it immediately, burying each piece in the woods not less than a mile apart from each other. He would not say why this had to be done, but continuously referred to the board as that wooden devil. When the boy's mother had refused, thinking it ludicrous as any rational person would, the grandfather had enlisted the boy and his friends, given them the store key, and told them the safe combination. I remember the kid telling me he was disappointed. He had always thought the safe held his grandfather's stash of ancient pirate treasure. Upon grabbing the wooden board from the safe, however, the boys had run into 2 problems. Firstly, the board was hard as stone, and the best way to break the thing was turning into a point of argument now that the hammer had failed. The second issue was that the woods in Chicago are scarce, and woods large enough for burying things miles apart from each other are even scarcer.
No, they're
Scarcer?
not. I mean, like, if you're downtown, sure. If you can drive for, 20 fucking minutes... you're good to go.
I imagine these kids are like small kids. They can't drive.
Well, I mean, they're not scarce in Chicago is what I'm saying. I mean, if you're a kid, then yeah. Walking distance, sure. That's fine. Realizing
it was most likely not the best idea to get in the way of a group of kids' family issues when a hammer and a wooden slab are involved, I figured my best option was to break the thing myself to make sure the kids didn't get hurt. Then be on my way. This proved to be extremely difficult. I remember thinking that the board had to be reinforced with a steel plate or something. I was beating on the thing with a hammer for the 100th time when I remembered that I had a hacksaw I had bought to remove a broken tree limb 2 years earlier and had never touched it since. I told the kids to sit tight and jogged down the block to my apartment. By the time I got back, it was snowing, and the boys were picking up the snow and throwing it at each other in clumps rather than snowballs. It was an unusually mild winter for us last year, and I think this may have been the beginning of the only snowstorm we had all year, if I remember correctly. there's no way. Chicago snows like insane amounts.
Yeah, I mean, you get a lot of snowstorms, but I mean, there's been years where the winter has been really mild. I don't know if I ever had a year where we only had one snowstorm. That's less believable, or that's not as unbelievable to me as some of the other things, like Chicago kids being violent. Like, come on.
The 5 of them continued to play with the snow as I hacked into the board with my saw. It took an unusually long time, but it worked. When the first piece snapped off, I picked it up and saw that the grain, where it had been cut, was unlike anything I had ever seen before, spiraling in a very distinct pattern that I can still picture in my head. The unstained wood was a deep reddish brown. Blood. When the board was in 6 pieces, Peter or Paul grabbed the corner with the picture of the sun. Then he and one of his friends ran a short distance into a wooded area on the edge of the park and buried it about a foot down. As this was going on, the other boys explained to me that they were planning on spending the day riding the elevated train and taking the pieces to the various wooded areas they had come up with. They just needed one more place to bury the 6th piece and hadn't come up with anything yet. As it happened to be a Sunday, if I recall, I offered to do it on the way to work the next day, and they agreed that it was a good plan. As the 5 of them walked away toward the north, I saw them enter a station for the Blue Line train, and I never saw them again. Later that night, as the snowstorm started to get really bad, I remember thinking that I hoped I hadn't made a mistake by letting them go off on their own. But a strange adult hanging around with 5 neighborhood kids tends to give people the wrong idea, regardless of whether he's looking out for their safety. I hoped they had gotten their task finished before the storm had really hit. The corner of the board I'd wound up with was the corner with the painting of the moon with the blank expression. I'd really planned to bury it. I swear I did, but we all wound up snowed in the following morning, and it ended up in the drawer of an end table. I don't know if you've ever been snowed in during a Chicago winter, but when this happens, they tend to send out these huge monolithic snow plows that push all of the snow into mountains on top of all the parked cars, none of which will be capable of moving an inch for at least 2 days.
No. You have to dig your car out. I have been told by so many professors, like, you don't make it to class, I don't care if your car is buried. That's on you. Leave 30 minutes early, dig your car out, and make it on time. And I have had to do that so many times, just saying. Even like for really bad snowstorms, like as soon as they plow the roads, they're like, you should fucking be here, period.
The day was rather uneventful, but as nightfall approached, I was taken by the eerie notion that someone was watching me through my living room window. I kept glancing toward it, expecting to see someone peering in at me, despite the fact that I live on the 3rd floor and my living room window faces the street. After a while, I shook off the notion, and I believe I went to sleep around 11. Around 1 a.m., I was awoken by what sounded like a mechanical device humming loudly and assumed it to be my heater, possibly being overworked due to the snowstorm. I stood up and put my ear next to the vent, but the sound wasn't coming from there. I walked into the living room to check the settings on my thermostat, and immediately every hair on my body stood at full attention. The sound was coming from the direction of my living room window. And as I turned to look, I caught the ghastly image of a solid white face with a wide mouth and dark eye sockets on the other side of the glass. I quickly turned on a light and the face disappeared. The mechanical droning noise seemed to recede. Had it all been my imagination, I wondered? When I was younger, I once had an episode of sleep paralysis where I witnessed a tree devouring my neighbor's dog through a bedroom window, but when I came out of it, the tree was back to normal and the dog was perfectly fine. Had this been something similar? Nevertheless, I hardly slept the rest of the night. I kept thinking I was hearing that deep mechanical drone somewhere in the distance. By the next night, I had regained my wits and fell asleep in my bed sometime around midnight. I woke again terrified to the sound of the same mechanical drone as the previous night, but this time much louder. As I sat up in bed and I saw the ghastly white face with sunken eyes on the other side of the window near the foot of my bed, no more than 3 feet from where I lay sleeping. It had no neck, arms, torso, nothing. It seemed to just float there above the streetlights below, emanating that horrible humming sound.
It's Zordon from Power Rangers. Yes.
All right. Zordon, he doesn't have a creepy face like that.
Kind of does. And I mean, he's looking for 5 plucky teenagers with attitude, and I'm pretty sure he came across those earlier.
True. I instinctively grabbed the drapes and pulled them closed, but the sound continued. Remembering what had happened the night before, I ran to the lights and flipped the switch. The noise slowly faded, but I was too afraid to open the drapes for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was still unable to get to work due to my car being frozen beneath a 7-foot pile of ice, but I absolutely had to get out of that apartment. I thought that if the face was going to come back, that I would have to be ready for it somehow. I went to a sporting goods store in the neighborhood and purchased a box of ammo for the .22 range pistol I hadn't used in years. The .22 caliber, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's a range pistol, but it's like .22 caliber. I don't know. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I also bought some caffeine tablets and a bag of coffee. Okay. Before nightfall, I set up...
Hey, be careful with those caffeine tablets. I have seen an episode of, I think it was Saved by the Bell, where one of them gets addicted to those. It's very, very rough.
Is it Screech?
No, it's Jesse.
Oh. Before nightfall, I set up camp in my living room with a pistol and a coffee pot, took one of the caffeine tablets, and rigged up a portable audio recorder that I sometimes use for work. I don't own a camera, and my cell phone's video function had not been working for months. Bullshit. So the best I could do was attempt to snap some photos in the dark with the cell if the face appeared again. It showed itself around 3 a.m. I was beginning to crash from all of the caffeine when I began to hear the droning sound approaching from the distance. I readied my gun in one hand and my cell phone in the other, but the face didn't appear at the window. I began to wonder if perhaps the face was outside my bedroom window, and as I snuck through the dark towards the door, the sound seemed to get louder. It's inside the house! The call's coming from inside the house. However, as I entered the room, the door slammed and locked behind me. It's fucking... Oh my god, it's there. And I heard glass shattering in the living room. Yo! Suddenly, the apartment was filled with the noises of things being smashed, thrown, and torn to pieces. The droning noise was deafeningly loud, and I covered one ear and turned my head away as I clawed at the doorknob with my other hand. But it simply would not open. It was as if the lock had been welded shut. After about 30 seconds of this, I raised my foot and smashed the door open with 2 kicks. Immediately, the crashing in the living room stopped, but the room itself had been completely torn to pieces. And as I looked above the debris at the shattered window, I saw the face one last time staring at me from the other side of my demolished Venetian blinds. It opened its mouth, exposing a white, dark cavern, the likes of which I hope to never see again. And the horrible sound got louder and louder as I snapped a single photograph with my camera and the flash went off. Then, in an instant, the face was gone. All I have to prove my story is a single blurry photograph and the audio taken by my portable recorder.
Look at this photograph. Every time I do it makes me think of the devil.
But the thing about it that disturbed me the most is the corner of the wooden board with the painting of the moon that was sitting on top of the debris in the exact center of the room. And the face had been altered so that the expression was identical to what I had just seen in the window pane with the wide, gaping, cavernous mouth. I buried it in the woods the following morning.
Is that the end?
End of story.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
He defeated the demon. Cool. Or the devil or whatever it was.
I don't know about defeating the demon or avoiding death by demon.
He got rid of it. So... this is on him. He waited way too long. Like, the story's well written. I know I nitpicked at certain things like that. I'm just saying, like, when you get shit on your whole life for being late somewhere because you spent 30 minutes digging your car out, you have to time it, too. If the snow's coming down and places haven't closed, because Chicagoland, places don't like to close because there's snow coming down.
Okay.
You have to time it between the snowplows. Snowplow will come through, bury your car, and you need to get the fuck out there and start digging immediately. And I've had times before where my car got buried twice while I was digging it, and I've been like, you know what? I'm fucking not going. Like, it's just not happening. So, there's that. Also, you should have just went and buried it in the fucking woods, or just given it to the kids to bury. Like, just saying. But I thought it was actually a really, really good story. I enjoyed it. The entire premise, like, yeah, he took some shortcuts. Like, usually when you write in stuff, you're trying to solve a problem. The problem of, why didn't I take a picture? Well, my phone camera wasn't working. Okay, cool. He should have dropped his phone at some point in the story and cracked the lens or something like that, you know? But either way, I thought overall it was really good. It does end very abruptly with the room getting torn apart, him just stating that he buried it. No complications apparently in burying it and getting rid of it. So it's just like, it's over, but I actually really enjoyed it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty interesting. I don't know. The only problem I have is that there's no definitive solution, you know? Like, how did he escape the wrath of the mask, and why was it that because he had the piece with the moon on it that it came after him?
Yeah.
It's just interesting.
There's a lot more you could develop off of this one thing, but I thought overall it was pretty good.
Yeah.
If I saw a bunch of kids beating on a piece of wood with a fucking hammer and they're like, we're trying to kill the devil, I've been like, have fun, and just moved on with my life. So.
Facts.
All right, so that was a pretty good one, and I'm about to read my final one of the show. This one's titled Hospitality, and it's much, much longer than my last story, which was very short. And it goes a little something like this. I've always been a creature of the city, the cold, hard streets, the tall, luminous skyscrapers, and the people, all self-absorbed in their own little stories to be concerned with the person next to them on the subway, or the person they just rammed into trying to get where they needed to go. It's where I was born. It's what I'm used to. But sometimes you have to take a break from uniformity and treat yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I have a cousin down in Alabama. Deep South. Robin, can you give us a reading of the Deep South?
The Deep South.
You fucking nailed that, dude.
I love Little Nicky so much. It's so good.
He invited me over, and it was something I've put off for way too long. And what the hell? I guess it's time to mix things up. They have like moved from like third person to first person narrative. It's weird. It was like personal essay. Now it's like, I don't know, diary style, whatever. My plane landed after a 4.5-hour flight. My legs were cramped, my back was sore, and my brain was numb from the crying babies. But regardless, we landed. But I still had a long drive ahead of me before I could cash in at my cousin's place. Cash in instead of crash? I don't know. After I got off the plane, I went to baggage retrieval and then went to the car rental. Shocker of all shocks, the rental supplied me with a shitty old Ford hatchback. It seemed like the best car they had, but I did my best to ignore the mystery stain in the back seat. Yuck.
Okay, but it depends, right? There's a difference between a mystery stain that is most assuredly semen, and there is a difference between that and like a mystery stain that could possibly be blood.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Where I went is someone had sex back there, someone jerked off back there, and you don't know which one it was. But yeah, you're right. Someone could also have been murdered in the back seat. I see what you're saying. Blood or semen, either way, yuck. I pulled out of the rental and began the long drive out of the city and into the rural countryside. I am a complete fucking idiot. I did myself in big time. I forgot to check the fuel gauge. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I was driving through a twisting dirt road, the sides lined with tall, dark trees, and the road beyond my headlight pitch black, and suddenly I ran out of fuel. I pulled over, but I doubt that actually mattered. Who would use this obscure-ass dirt road in the middle of an Alabama backwoods? Answer, me. A complete and total idiot. As I tried hard not to completely second-guess my decision to come here, which I was having a real hard time with, I got out of the car and stood on the side of the road. I looked at my cell phone, and sure enough, no service. The only way this could get worse was if Jason fucking Voorhees came crashing through the forest with his machete and ran me through.
Okay.
Regardless, I was stuck. Completely and totally. So I did the only thing I could. I crawled in the back seat of my car, I really thought he was going to say something else, and tried to sleep. Why? Because I had...
On the mystery stain?
I don't know, maybe they curled their body around the mystery stain. Because I had nothing else. Also, I would start walking until I got reception, but I'm not an idiot in a story, so... Why? Because I had nothing else. No other option. Couldn't make any calls, couldn't drive anywhere. Yeah, walking is apparently not a fucking option, lazy asshole. So...
Is it in the middle of the night?
Yeah, he said it's pitch black.
I wouldn't want to walk in the middle of the night.
I mean, I would. I'm not going to sleep in my fucking broken down car in the middle of the night.
I'll see you in the afterlife.
Okay, cool. You'll stay in the car. I'll go get help. One of us will definitely die if this is a horror movie. So I would sleep, and in the morning, I would walk through an Alabama backwoods. Yeah, I am totally fucked. This was my line of thinking as I lay on the seat, eyes staring at the ceiling. How was I supposed to fall asleep? I wasn't exactly in a safe neighborhood. Hell, I wasn't even in a neighborhood. And another thing, it was cold. Not the freezing it got in a New York winter, but cold enough that my light jacket couldn't stop me from shivering. I felt pathetic. I crawled up front to see if I could turn on the heater, but sure enough, for this shitty car, it was busted. So I climbed back into the back seat and quietly whispered a swearing fit the likes of which would make even angels cry. After that, I felt slightly better. I think angels would cry at normal swear words. It should be like a demon being like, oh, why I never.
Why I never.
But I still felt stupid for coming here. I felt even stupider for not checking the fuel gauge. God, that was so stupid. Like mind-bogglingly so. But while I was hounding myself for my own unacceptably vast stupidity, I heard something that nearly made me cry in relief. A car engine and tires crunching on dirt. I practically leaped out of my car. It should be leapt. I practically leapt out of my car, swinging the door open with so much enthusiasm it should have broken the hinge. The car that would surely be my saving grace was currently only about 100 feet from me, as it approached me slowly. I stuck my thumb in the air, signifying I was hitchhiking. The car slowly pulled up beside me, and the window rolled down. Inside the cabin, a middle-aged man sat. His hair was gray and balding, his face round and chubby.
This is some Texas Chainsaw Massacre shit.
He had a neat plaid dress shirt tucked into his khaki pants, khakis, and below his warm eyes clad in rimless glasses, he gave me an amiable smile, and all my fears of the night were nearly dissolved. This guy sounds like a fucking serial killer. Well, howdy, my friend. Looks like you found yourself in quite a predicament, he said, benevolently. Yes, sir, I said. He gave a hearty chuckle. Yup, happens to the best of us, son, especially those who ain't from these parts. I'd be happy to lend you a ride and let you stay in my home for the night till I can help you with your vehicle.
No.
This struck me as odd.
The answer is no.
As no one in New York would ever offer you a ride in the middle of the night. That was a good way to get yourself mugged or raped or worse. But I, admittedly, decided to take full advantage of his blind trust. He wasn't worried he was going to be hurt. He was saying like offering a stranger a ride and a place to stay could get the other person, the nice person, killed, which is like the most New York thing I've ever read. All right. He goes on to say, oh, thank you very much, sir, but I'm afraid my car is just out of gas. He nodded. Ah, that's all right. We have plenty of gasoline back at my humble abode. Tell you what, I can drive you there and call roadside services to pick up your vehicle. I chuckled at this. Again, no worries, sir. It's a rental. I can just call the company. I just can't get signal. He nodded again. Well, alrighty then, son. I can just drive you to my home and you can call the company.
Dude, what the fuck?
Till they arrive, you can sleep at my house. I felt overwhelmed with gratitude to this kindly stranger, but also a bit nervous. This kind of hospitality always set me on edge. No one was nice in New York unless they wanted to sell you something. But regardless, I decided to accept his offer. It was just
my... He doesn't want to sell you something. He wants to, like, eat your body parts.
It was just my city instincts, after all. No need to be so judgmental. That would be very kind of you, sir. Thank you. He smiled and nodded, leaned over the passenger seat, and opened the door. I climbed into the seat and shut the door.
No!
The car smoothly accelerated as the man pressed his foot on the gas pedal. The inside of the car was well made, but it had an air of humbleness, as if the driver...
What? Who the fuck wrote
Every
this?
time I get into someone's car, I'm like, God damn, it's so humble in here.
There's an air of humbleness in here, man.
I'm so humble. As if the driver just wanted a car he could comfortably drive. I respected that. We drove in silence for 10 to 15 minutes until he spoke. So, what brings you to these parts, son? He asked politely. I told him about my cousin having invited me to his house for the week and how I took the opportunity to get away from the city. He smiled. You know what, son? I've always wanted to visit the city myself, but I could never bear to spend too long away from home. I nodded.
Because that's where all the bodies are.
I nodded. As much as I appreciated the stranger's help, I was not in the mood for extended conversation. And something still felt off. Why was his dick out? No, I'm kidding. I made that last
Shut up.
Was I really this unused to politeness? Or was it something else? I was cut off from this train of guilt-ridden thoughts when the stranger spoke again. Hey, son, would you kindly grab my eyeglass wipes from the glove box? I have this darn spot on my glasses.
Nope.
I nodded and opened the glove box. I didn't see them immediately, so I felt around in the glove box, and while I was moving around, my hand brushed against cold metal. I felt around it, and my senses confirmed it was a pistol. That was strange for me because I didn't know anyone who carried in New York. I felt around some more, and my hand wrapped around a small box. I pulled it out and handed it to him. Thank you kindly, son, he said. Now, maybe this wasn't my business, but it was strange for me. I felt something strange in there. Do you carry? I asked, probably rudely. Stranger didn't seem to mind. Yes, I do indeed. I always carry a firearm in my vehicle. Makes me feel safer.
Okay. Is he a creep or is he about to get murdered?
I nodded. Yeah, there's logic to that. It's just that where I'm from, it's so hard to get a gun that no one carries except criminals and gun fanatics. The stranger shook his head at that. Darn shame that. Can't have too much protection nowadays, especially around these. A sharp bump from behind the car cut him off. He turned around, his eyes fixating out the back window, eyebrows cocked. Son, if you would kindly wait in here, I'll be going out to investigate that. I nodded, and he exited the car. When the fuck did they pull over? He skipped that part. But that anxiety in my stomach was slowly churning more aggressively. I nodded, and he exited the car. But that anxiety in my stomach was slowly churning more aggressively, and something felt very, very wrong. I decided to do something potentially very risky. I opened the glove box again and dug through it some more.
Grab the gun.
After brushing past the pistol again, my hand found a book. But when I dug it out, it wasn't anything suspicious. It was a Bible. Something about this inconspicuous leather book set me on edge, so I opened it to the middle, and there, sitting in the center of a carved-out section of paper, lay a camping knife. I ran my fingers along the edge of the blade, and I saw something that horrified me. The blade was tinted slightly red along the edge. My stomach felt like it knotted several times as I asked myself a question I should have asked long before I entered this man's vehicle. Why was a man with a car this high quality driving through Alabama backwoods? I quickly closed the book and stuffed it back into the glove box. I heard the trunk close and his shoes crunching on the dirt as he slowly approached the car again. I saw his figure outside the door just before it swung open, and the man crawled back inside. He was shaking his head shamefully. What was that sound? I asked, trying to swallow down the building dread crawling up my throat. The stranger sighed. It appears we hit a rabbit, son. It was dead when I got there, so I moved it out of the way.
Sure.
Suddenly, I was more acutely aware of the strange things he was saying, like why would someone pick up a rabbit's corpse, and why had the noise come from the trunk if we had hit a rabbit? Had it come from the trunk? Nevertheless, my suspicions went unvoiced as I, too, shook my head at the falsified tragedy. Shame, I said. The stranger cleaned his glasses before repositioning himself at the wheel. Welp, he said. No use crying over spilt milk. Let's keep on the move.
Ha ha ha, get it? Because it's a cat? Oh, no, wait, it was a rabbit.
It was a rabbit. We still got a good hour's drive ahead of us. As I made myself the very closest I could be to anything resembling comfort, I tried not to imagine what had actually made that noise or what this guy was hiding. All I could think about was where I would be in the next hour and what that meant for my personal health. We drove in silence for the next 20 minutes, the only sound the purr of the engine and the dirt underneath the car's tires. That and my own heart pounding in my chest so hard, I was surprised the stranger couldn't hear my heartbeat. Or, my brain thought horribly, maybe he does hear it and is just so used to his victim's hearts doing the same thing. As we drove, my mind began racing, trying to formulate a plan on how to get out of this car. The best plan I had was saying, I need to take a piss, and then bolting when I was free. But the stranger would probably just chase me, and I seriously didn't want to be chased through an Alabama backwoods by a knife-wielding Jesus freak.
What the fuck?
So I kept coming up with ideas. My best bet was using the gun to shoot the stranger and then driving back to civilization. But that would require proof of the stranger's psychotic nature, so I was stuck for the moment. Finally, I decided what I needed to do. I would get the stranger out of the car by saying I saw something on the side of the road. If he got out to investigate, I would get out of the car, grab the gun, and go around the back of the car to look in the trunk. This is a pretty shitty plan, just FYI. Just steal the fucking car. This was an older car, so the trunk should have a hatch. And he didn't have a key when he went to check the trunk, so it couldn't be locked. So I pretended to stare at something on the side of the road. Is that a dead deer? I said. The stranger looked out my window, as I had hoped, slowed the car down. I wonder, he said. Stay here. The stranger's fucking stupid. Like, if someone was in my car and said, is that a dead deer? I'd be like, I don't fucking know, and just keep driving. The idea that I would just randomly pull over to check on a dead deer is ludicrous. Okay, the stranger says, stay here. Not fucking likely. He got out of the car and began making his way into the trees. He seemed to be making his way to a dark lump in the forest, a few 100 feet away. Probably a log, but it could be mistaken for an animal with suggestion and darkness. I waited a few seconds, letting him get far enough away. Then I opened the glove box and drew the pistol. Then I slowly and carefully opened the car door, making as little noise as I humanly could. The door unlatched, making a thump noise. I trained my gaze on his round figure, but he didn't seem to notice. I then carefully tiptoed around the side of the car, treading lightly in the hopes of not crunching dirt under my feet. I felt in my pocket, and sure enough, my phone was still there. My plan was to snap a picture, then steal the car. If I had to, I would shoot the stranger. I looked at the gun and turned the safety off. I didn't know how to check if it was loaded, so I just hoped. Then, standing in front of the trunk, I reached for the handle. Dirt crunched behind me, and I whirled around, extending my arm in the direction of the noise, gun ready. The stranger stood with his arms clasped behind his back, his face shrouded in darkness. He gave me a chuckle as dark as his features. So, boy, you seem to be the curious type. Ain't your mother ever told you to refrain from nosiness? I gulped and placed my finger on the trigger. Stay back, I said. I don't know what you're doing or what's in that trunk, but you better stay the fuck away from me. The stranger tisked. Such profane language, son. What do you plan on doing with that weapon of yours? Shoot me? You ain't got the nerve. Not to mention you don't know anything about what's in that trunk. You'll be charged as a murderer. He took a step closer, illuminating his face just a tad bit more. His eyes glistened like fish eggs, boring holes into me with their fierce, murderous look. His smile was less that of friendliness and more like a wolf baring its teeth at its prey. Just before the kill, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a switchblade. Now, boy, why don't you hop back into the car and we forget this nonsense about me being a killer? That sound good? And then my stomach nodded several times over as it realized something very important. I never accused you of being a killer, I said. Why would you say that? His smile became a scowl and he took another step closer. Get back in the car, boy. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I stepped back, pressing my hand onto the cool metal of the trunk, finding solace in its cold embrace.
Pop it open.
I then pointed the gun at the stranger and said what I always wanted to be my final words. Fuck off. He cracked his neck like a fist fighter would and then lurched forward. I pulled the trigger. The muzzle of the pistol erupted in a bright flare and the stranger grabbed his stomach, dropping his knife. He collapsed forward, head hitting the ground at my feet. He gasped and blood began to pool around his body. I looked at him.
What's in the trunk?
I looked at him for a good 10 minutes. Masturbating.
What?
No, I'm kidding. I looked at him for a good 10 minutes. Then very slowly, I turned around, my hand still resting on the trunk. I dropped the gun. That's so dumb. I dropped the gun, placing my other hand inside the groove of the trunk handle. My fingers wrapped around the plastic of the handle. Slowly, they pulled towards me, bringing the handle with it. The latch released with a thunk. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, pressing the photo app, then aimed it at the trunk that I slowly swung open. The hinges squeaked slightly as they finished their rotation. The lights on either side of the trunk coated my body in a crimson red. Ooh, nice symbolism. And inside the trunk was something that would condemn me for all my life in the cell of a prison, something that would leave me burning in the deepest pits of hell for all eternity. It was something that proved me wrong and proved to the cops that I was a killer with no redemption. And maybe I was, because in that trunk there was nothing more than a deer carcass and a shotgun. He was a hunter, and I had just killed an innocent man.
What the fuck, dude?
The end.
But I mean, that guy was so creepy.
This is the thing. He's a hunter? No. There was something wrong with that dude. You pull a fucking switchblade on someone who has a gun. You keep approaching him. You insist he comes back to your house with you.
He should have just said, there's a fucking deer carcass in my trunk.
Yeah, it's like all circumstantial stuff where it's like him being shady and acting like a fucking creep in the end is exactly what makes the guy think he needs to defend himself. I don't know what Alabama's laws are, but I'm pretty sure this guy's going to get off. Not like ejaculate, but like he's not going to go to jail. I don't know though. Who knows? It reminds me so much of My Cousin Vinny. Not really, not at all. Except that he's from New York and he's in Alabama. That's it. It's the only thing that's the same. So,
okay.
Either way, I really like the way this built. I really like the symbolism at the end where like the car lights illuminate him in crimson red, like reflecting like the blood on his hands, that sort of thing. So
the blood of the innocent.
Hopefully you all enjoyed it too. All right, and that's just about everything we have for this particular episode of Pastatime. I want to thank everyone who watched us live over at youtube.com/scarish and twitch.tv/scarish podcast. We record Storytime and or Pastatime every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you would like to join us for the lives, they are so much fun. We give out surprises at the end of every single episode. If you have a story that you would like to submit to us that is a short fictional horror story, feel free. We would love to hear it. We would definitely read it on the show if given permission and the content is, good to go. You can email pastatime@scarish.com or go to our website, scarish.com, and click on Contact Us. Drop it in that. It'll come directly to us. Or hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Twitter is @scarishpod. And Instagram is @scarishpodcast. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Those are monthly donation tiers start at $1. You can also go to ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast, and those are one-time donations.
Indeed.
And we're thankful for every single donation that you folks give us and help us keep the show going.
We really are. So thank you to everyone who supports us in all the various ways. We feel that support, and it really drives us forward. It means the world to us. That is everything we have this week. So Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.